launched in June 2009 with a broadcast of Phaedra, which is a rather unknown Greek tragedy starring Helen Mirren. We're very fortunate that we play to very high capacity in our home on the South Bank in London, and we wanted to be able to engage with a wider audience, both nationally and internationally. We now have a commitment to broadcasting our work through to UK cinemas and internationally as well. And on the back of that have now got an entirely digital audience who engage with us only digitally. They may never come and see us in our theatre, and so it's really how do we engage that audience and keep them engaged with us when we only have a virtual experience with them. So just to talk about some of the motivation for our reasons of doing NT Live and hopefully how it kind of fits in from a cinema point of view, we really wanted to launch it as an experiment. We were going to give it a try and see what happened, and we were really prepared to walk away at the end of it if it didn't work. We have grown since we started. We launched on about 60 cinemas in the UK. We're now on about 560 cinemas. We absolutely wanted to make our broadcasts accessible and to make sure that they were engaging with audiences too, which links back to our mission. But also I think key to our success was the approach in terms of how we actually film it. And what we wanted to do was to absolutely, it's a mediated experience. It's not like going to watch the theatre, but neither is it like going to watch a film. And we can't do CGI, we can't do special effects, but everything that happens on our stages is real life effects. It's happening in front of you. And the scene changes and explosions are actually happening on stage. So for us, it was really important that the cinema audience get as good an experience and as good a viewing position as the theatre audience would. So it was about making sure that we gave them what we call the best seats in the house. So we really wanted to create an experience that worked in cinema. So it wasn't about saying this is a theatre performance, you sit in a single seat and you watch it from wherever you experience. It was about translating theatre into the cinema medium and how that would work. So we do use multiple cameras, we put them in the best seats in the house. We lose about 200 to 300 seats within our theatre auditorium to be able to accommodate the cameras. And what we hope that that gives is a really good experience for those audiences watching in the cinema. And we also needed to make sure that it worked financially. It had to be a sustainable proposition for cinemas. We were aware that potentially on some of our broadcasts, if we're doing a 3.5 hour long Shakespeare, there would be an opportunity for cinemas to be showing 2 films during that time. So we needed to make sure that whatever we did, it was a financially sustainable offering for the cinema partners that we worked with. This graph illustrates the growth in NT Live audience over the last 5 years. It's been an absolutely phenomenal growth and way beyond anything that we could have expected or predicted when we first started. We really went into it, like I say, as an experiment. We wanted to try and see what was working. And I think what we tried to do was look at the diversity of our programming and see what was working. In our first season, we did 5 broadcasts, and they were a mixture of a star-led production with Helen Mirren, a Shakespeare production, something aimed at family audiences, and a new play written by Alan Bennett. So what we tried to do was really test the waters and see what was working. And I think what we found is that cinema audiences naturally respond to those talent-driven offerings. So where we're able to show a production which has talent involved who are known to a film audience and a cinema-going audience, those tend to perform better than what may perform well to a theatre audience. But I think what we've seen is an absolutely massive growth, and I think we've really benefited from the increasing number of people that are now doing live broadcasts. Obviously the Metropolitan Opera was going before we launched, as was the Royal Opera House. The RSC are now broadcasting, as are Glyndebourne, and I know obviously Billy Elliot was mentioned earlier as well, so much more expansion into the West End. We've actually started working not just on shows that are at the National Theatre, but with partner organisations as well. So we have done broadcasts from the West End. We captured a a production on Broadway this summer. And for us, it's really about picking the best of theatre and being able to bring that to audiences, and working with other organisations who are also publicly funded, who might not have the capacity and the resource that the National Theatre has to be able to bring this work out. So, for example, we recently did A Streetcar Named Desire with Gillian Anderson from the Young Vic, and we did Coriolanus with Tom Hiddleston from the Donmar Warehouse, 2 organisations that might not have been able to broadcast those works without the benefit of engaging with the National Theatre. I've just pinched some figures from the BFI Stats yearbook, which I thought would be useful to look at in terms of event cinema, alternative content, and its rise over the last 5 years. So these figures are from 2013. There were 111 events covering theatre, opera, ballet, exhibitions, concert and comedy, totalling 18.7 million gross to the box office. The figures actually come from Rentrack, who've only recently started compiling accurate data for alternative content. But I think now that we have got this data, it's really interesting to look at the potential growth. And theatre accounted for the largest share of the box office with 7.2 million gross from 14 events. I think the interesting thing here around theatre is the opportunity we have to be able to involve talent that have got that recognisable face to a cinema audience. Although there's kind of big opera stars and big ballet stars, they don't necessarily translate in the same way. So, for example, when the RSC did Richard II with David Tennant, I know that performed really well for them, and that was about a recognisable face and someone that the audience could engage with. So just to bring it back to the financials for a moment, obviously talking about it needing to be financially sustainable and a financial proposition that can work for cinemas, because I hope we aren't contributing to the death of cinema. The stats come from the BFI Stats yearbook, and also the year-to-date figures for 2014 are from Rentrack, and that chart there tracks gross UK box office income from alternative content events. And I think you can see the trajectory that it is going on is continuing to increase. I think the question now is, it was a developing industry or area of the industry. It's how much further can it go? Is it going to reach a plateau? How can we continue to reach new audiences? And I think we're facing a lot of the same challenges as have already been discussed this morning around how do we engage an audience and make sure that they're loyal and they're continuing to come back, but how do we also continue reaching new audiences? We did some research last summer with our NT Live audiences and found that actually they were very loyal. So they were coming to about 50% of what we did in a year. So we usually do about 12 broadcasts. So they were coming to us 6 times a year, or coming to cinema 6 times a year to see NT Live. And I think that stickiness of that audience is something that's really interesting. I think what we're now doing, 5 years in, we're kind of a developing business. We want to look at how do we reach the new audiences, the younger audiences. Certainly audiences for alternative content or live cinema do tend to be on the slightly older spectrum, slightly higher income earners, and primarily female, or certainly more female than male. And I think for us, we're now looking at how do we diversify that audience and increase it. And certainly a lot of the audience can be programming led. So when we do something that has particularly interesting talent involved, that does change the audience demographic. But I think that is really a big challenge. It's how do we continue to grow that audience and reach that 15 to 24-year-old audience who are used to having a second screen experience, and we're asking them to have a theatre experience, which may be something they've not had before. And we definitely don't encourage in the theatre even tweeting along or second screen experiences. So for us, it's even more interesting thing to look at. So I think the questions for us going forwards are how we do continue to develop that audience. As I said, they tend to be slightly older. And for us, we've got to be reaching that new audience. And I think as well, that's how we work with our cinema partners and how we develop that audience is really interesting. They've been mentioned already before, but the 3 biggest events of this year were Back to the Future, the Secret Cinema event, Billy Elliot Live, and also Warhorse. I think they're really interesting propositions in terms of diversifying that audience, but also really interesting from a cinema perspective, because Warhorse and Billy Elliot have both been feature films, and Secret Cinema Back to the Future was a re-release of an existing feature film. So I definitely don't think that they contribute to the death of cinema. I think they're a different way of presenting content and a different way of kind of reaching potentially new audiences, but I definitely hope they're not the death of cinema. And I think the question is, can audiences continue to grow? There's more and more people now in the alternative content market. We are going to reach saturation. It's a question. Are we going to reach it? When are we going to reach it? Certainly our experience from the National Theatre perspective, we also did some research with a panel of cultural attenders and arts goers, which found that 75% of them were aware of live broadcasts, but only around about 20% had actually attended. So there's a huge market potential there of of people who are aware of these live broadcasts but perhaps haven't made the choice to go and see. I think for us, it's looking at how do we convert them into audiences. We know there's a real potential audience there, and an audience that really want to engage and see this content and probably do have relationships with their local cinemas, but how do we get them to take the chance on seeing a live broadcast and turn them hopefully into a loyal audience. They have said that they're interested or extremely interested in going, but the next step is how do we actually turn those people into audiences. And I think the number of events is growing year on year, and the box office income is matching that at the moment, but potentially there will come a point where we've perhaps reached saturation. And I know one of the big questions is alternatives content on impact on British independent film or on screen slots, and I think we as the National Theatre are really aware of that, and not over-programming, but also we want to be able to showcase the diversity of everything that's going on within the theatre industry and not just the work of the National Theatre. And I think the next interesting thing in terms of specifically the National Theatre is that we will be releasing our first feature film next year. There have been feature films which have been based on productions that have been at the National Theatre, such as The History Boys, but this is the first film that we've actually invested in the development and production, and we'll be working directly on the distribution for this film. So I really, really hope that cinema isn't dying, otherwise we're going to be a bit stuck when we release our film next year. So really that's the questions that I think are provocations, I should say, to discuss. And is alternative content really the end of cinema? And what does it mean for the future of film? Is it bringing in a new audience who can be converted to film goers? Is there an audience there who want to be able to access alternative content because they're already engaged with film? Thank you.